Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I'd like to discuss the trade hubs that UK businesses have been setting up in the Netherlands in order to cope with the trade barriers brought on by Brexit, and explain why it will only make more sense for British-based businesses to shift more of their operations, which means jobs and the money they would otherwise pay into our taxes, overseas as a result of leaving the customs union and single market. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, a couple of things in the news Brexit-wise right now. The largest employer in Brexit vote in Newark is leaving for the EU. That's been fairly prominent. And this isn't just a bit of the business. The whole production base is off. So what exactly is happening? Well, there's also been a bit made of the Brexit trade hubs in the Netherlands this week. The idea being that British-based businesses buy or rent some space in an EU country, move some of their stock, say, so that when it needs to be shipped to an EU customer, there are no further delays. It doesn't solve the problem of Brexit as such, because it still means these businesses having to divide their operations across two different countries with two different sets of laws, tax regulations and so on, when that might not have been commercially beneficial to do so before Brexit. It's come at extra cost to the business. It doesn't mean they escape the costs of Brexit, because it means jobs moving from Britain to the EU. Also means other costs as well. It still costs more money to transport that stock to the warehouse. If you produce it in Britain, send it to a warehouse in the Netherlands, well, there's still all the export controls, as we'd call it from our end, that it wouldn't have had at all before Brexit. And it will still take much longer to transport the stuff to the Netherlands, and a lot more paperwork also required. But at least those extra delays are happening as the business transports to itself, not the customers. As long as they can maintain enough stock in their, say, Dutch warehouse space, then they can supply customers as quickly as they could have done before we left the single market. But how did we come to this situation? Well, it was actually the government that advised it. And I mean the UK government, not just the Dutch government. Obviously, they'd be delighted. As the Trade and Cooperation Agreement was being finalised a mere week before it came into effect, with no implementation period. You usually have an implementation period lasting several years for much simpler trade deals. But no, none of that. So businesses contacted the civil service for help navigating trade barriers that were not just brand new, but where no barriers to trade had really existed for many of them before. The government's advice was to set up parts of their business inside the EU. Hi, I'm a British-based business who sells to EU customers. I don't know how that works now. Can you help me? Sure, just conduct your EU business from a base inside the EU. No, I'm based in Britain. I don't have any of my business in the EU, only my customers. Okay, in that case, you need to get yourself moved to an EU country to carry out all that EU business. Maybe an office and some warehouse space in the Netherlands. They're really close to your customers. Okay. Is there any way I can still sell to my EU customers without having to drop British jobs and investment and move it overseas? No, not unless you're able to absorb the massive costs from your profits. Not really, no. And this was from the UK government. Despite what some ministers tried to claim, we didn't just get new procedures that would take time to learn. That's what they imagine. Oh yeah, it's a different way of doing stuff, but once you've got the hang of it, it'll be as good as before. No, we've got actual trade barriers. Now, unfamiliarity was, and of course still is, a massive problem. But even when familiar, you still have to complete loads more paperwork. You still have to pay fees that you didn't have to do before. You may still have tariffs slapped on your goods at the other end. And if it works out to be tariff-free, you've still got to do the paperwork to prove it. And you certainly have to pay much higher transport costs for your goods to arrive way later than used to be the case. Familiarity doesn't prevent any of those things. It just means you know what to expect. Lots of businesses were too small to set up a space in the Netherlands and employ people to manage it, so they just had to stop selling altogether. I've talked recently about the sudden and large drop in the number of UK businesses who are able to export to the EU now. But for those businesses who were selling enough to EU customers to make it commercially viable, they have been taking the government's advice. So now the Netherlands has been enjoying some Brexit benefits so obvious there's no need for them to have a Minister for Brexit Opportunities to sniff them out. And these hubs will presumably carry on expanding. According to an article I was reading in the Financial Times, about half of them was set up between 2017 up until Brexit, with the other half being set up last year as a reaction to our hard Brexit once it had already occurred. So given that half of the total was set up last year after Brexit hit, it's not a stretch to suppose that this new way of trading will take off even more after this year. Because after all, in 2021 we faced pretty much full exporting barriers, but nowhere near the same level on imports. Now, we have introduced some customs controls on imports, but that was only at the start of this year. It's not yet full controls. The government claims it's full controls. It's not, because they're applying a very light smuggler-friendly touch to checks. But the system still has to be used. And even though we don't have full import controls, we do have some. And systems that have been released to try and deal with them are taking more time and tears. A couple of days ago, the median waiting time at Ashford, big old lorry park in Kent, was up to 75 hours. 75 hours. That was the longest I've seen it. I've seen it, I think, last week, just before Easter, it got up to 53 hours. What that meant was that any lorry entering Kent with the intention of leaving the country via one of our main ports was waiting in the lorry park for an average of 75 hours. Some would be more. You know, before another few hours at Dover or Folkestone as well. Now, it's not always this bad, of course. It ebbs and flows. You know, as I'm recording this, it's about 6 hours. But it doesn't matter whether it's 6 hours or 75 minutes, plus the several hours at the port itself. This is all time waiting around that wasn't there before. Before we left the customs union single market, wasn't there. You might have a few days in the year when maybe there was a bit of a delay on the road. That was it, a few hours. It meant that the traffic management tap system had to be deployed again this week, after last being used last week to cope with the Easter traffic. Because the thing is, it'll keep happening. People are trying to say, oh, this is the Easter tourist traffic, people going on holiday, you know. Like all those tens of miles of lorries were full of holiday makers. It's not holiday makers that are going to mean problems on the roads. It's just traffic from whatever source. And that traffic is going to increase at both holiday and non-holiday times because the demand for freight increases throughout the year and it reaches a peak just before Christmas. Then it crashes in January and in January they'll be going, oh yeah, the road, it's all sorted now, it's all fine. It's like, no, there's just way lower demand for freight in January and then it'll slowly build up. Then you'll have a disaster in Easter and it'll just carry on getting worse over the following year. We're in April. We can't cope in April. That means exporting businesses can't cope in April. Think about how they must be viewing the rest of the year because they know demand for their products will increase, but transport problems are just going to get worse. Time is money, as they say. So even without any other trade problems, and there are many, just that extra few days taken travelling through Kent is costly to business. So of course they will reduce costs by taking up the government's advice to stop investing in the UK, move abroad. Also has the advantage, it means their customers are not waiting several days more because you absorb those several days wait to get it out of the country, getting it to your warehouse. Once it's in your warehouse, customer orders it straight from your warehouse to them. When Boris Johnson sodded off to India yesterday, he said he'd be visiting British investments. Pretty soon, if the Prime Minister wishes to observe any British investment, it's going to require an international visit because there'll be bog all left here. So now let's move from the concept of a business that produces and then exports to the EU to one that imports raw materials or components from EU suppliers, then makes a thing with them, and then exports some of them back to EU customers. These are getting hit with Brexit trade barriers both ways. Those trade barriers have just increased this year and there are still several more to come. There's a real impetus for these businesses to move their operations to the EU because they are getting hit both ends. So they would really want to get their EU supplies to a manufacturing base in the EU to prevent import problems and then ship it out from there as well to avoid export problems. And this is what is happening, most especially this week in the news in Newark, but all over the country. And even if Brexit calms down for a bit, it'll carry on happening as more businesses see the long-term commercial benefits. But Brexit isn't calming down. There are two major sources of strife for businesses that trade with the EU right now. The first is the fact that more trade barriers are known to be coming. Import controls will have to get tighter at some point because at the moment it's just a boon for smugglers. Standards controls have to come in at some point. Same sort of thing, really. Then there's the biometric checks, but that's mostly for outgoing. But whatever stifles outgoing traffic also hits incoming traffic, and vice versa. So even if a business can just about manage now with the current situation without having to relocate, that's not going to be the case long term. So more businesses will make the move to bypass the still increasing trade barriers, and if they've got any sense, they'll do it as soon as they can, before those trade barriers get even higher. Secondly, the government seems intent on creating even more unnecessary chaos on top of the unnecessary trade barriers from their extreme Tory Brexit. Threats to tear up the withdrawal agreement only have the effect of a threat to the entire trading cooperation agreement. If businesses cannot be sure of the trading relationship between Britain and the EU over the next few years, and on a monthly basis the government keeps threatening to basically dissolve the entire agreement that we do have, the weak deal that we do have, those businesses cannot make sound decisions. So it's much easier just to move to the EU, leave the chaos behind them. The residents of Newark and other affected areas might like to think on that. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And until next time, I'll see you later.